Right. Oh, it's quite warm in here. Okay. Let me see. What are we doing today? Testing. I started working on the Gitia formula, and I'm using a cookie cutter provided by someone else. Uh, and the way they've set things up is they've included a framework for testing using a VM. And I thought to myself, that seems a bit more heavyweight than I want to do, particularly since I've gone to all the trouble of setting up a virtual machine as a development virtual machine. And I'm going to be setting up an entire pipeline as well. Um, it seemed a bit much to then add add to that another virtual machine. Besides which, it also presented a bit of a problem in terms of the way the CI/CD pipeline would need to work. Not a tragic problem, but one which would cause a problem for me locally. Refer back to my earlier videos about nested virtual machines. So what I decided to do, I went and had a look at a few other of the better written formulae that are available on GitHub, and they all use different approaches, but the consensus on the whole for the better ones seems to be using Docker for test isolation, using the test kitchen for test execution, using InSpec for the testing framework, and using GitHub Actions. Now, I don't want to use GitHub Actions particularly, the GitHub workflow, because I don't want to tie myself into GitHub, because most of this stuff won't be on GitHub. It'll be in a private Git repository, or a Git repository related to a different project. And GitHub and GitLab will only be used as sort of mirrors. So I don't particularly want to go down the route of writing GitHub Actions. And I'm kind of married, or marrying my systems to Concourse CI because it's simple and it seems flexible enough for what I want to do. So that still leaves me with, okay, I'm going to use Docker for test isolation. It also means you can run the tests independently just by running the Docker. Okay, what about actually doing tests? I'm going to go with TestInfra. I want to stick with Python for pretty much everything. SaltStack's already Python based, so the formulae, if you're going to write any modules or anything, they're going to be in Python in all likelihood. So it seems odd to me. I suppose it's an accident of history in to a large extent. People using Test Kitchen rather than PyTest seems a bit weird. And using InSpec rather than TestInfra. I can understand that to some extent. I think from what I can see, InSpec is a much more comprehensive framework, whereas TestInfra, may lack some of the features of InSpec. To which I say, I don't care. The vast majority of the stuff I want to test, TestInfra will do just fine. And besides which, it's in Python, it's open source. I can extend it if I really need to, so it's not a big deal. Plus the fact that a lot of the comments about the deficiencies of TestInfra compared to InSpec are quite old, so they may not apply. So, okay, TestInfra means I can stay in the sort of Python world, and is open source and has the benefit that I can extend it if I really need to. So Docker for test isolation, TestInfra for actually the framework. PyTest for the test runner, which again means it's in common with everything else I'll be working on, and using concourse pipelines and tasks. Again, having looked at, I mean, the GitHub Action stuff's pretty cool, and the workflow, the GitHub workflow makes sense. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, and there are a couple of things that gave me pause for thought, particularly the testing matrix, the test strategy matrix is kind of nice. There is something similar to that in Concourse called Across, which effectively is like a cross-cutting thing. It works the same as matrix. It sets variables in various combinations so that you can then use those. But there are some limitations to the way it's used in Concourse. But again, nothing, I don't think anything couldn't work around fairly easily. So I'm not too worried by that. Yeah, so it seems like that's going to be the test strategy. So what I'm going to do now is go back to the cookie cutter, tweak it, clean it up. The other thing in the cookie cutter was there were some really odd things that they decided to do. Like, for example, and I kind of get it. They've got a load of scripts for doing some of the setup stuff. So, for example, for running your test infra, they've got a script. And what the script does is it first sees whether or not pip is installed. If it isn't, then it uses Salt, because you've already got a Salt minion installed in your Vagrant. Okay, so it uses Salt to install pip. Okay, I can understand why you'd want to do that, because you don't have to worry then about the package. Although, given that you're in control of the virtual machines you're running on, seems a bit weird. You know, why not just do a package install, given that you know that you're on a Debian-based system? And then in the next bit of the script, they go, "Oh, now we'll just do a pip install." It's like, well, why didn't you use Salt for that? Why didn't you use Salt to do the pip install? You know, you could have just as easily done that. Same goes for test infra. You can, in actual fact, they do have a wrapper around the tests for test infra in there. It's a really weird mess. So it needs to be cleaned up and standardized. The other thing is, why on earth in your bash script, again, it may be for performance reasons, although it seems a bit weird. You know, why didn't you just provide a complete salt state and just apply the salt state for setting everything up? It's already idempotent. You don't need a script to say if pip is not installed, then run a salt call. If this package isn't installed, then run pip. Why wouldn't you just have written all of that in a salt state and just say install it using a salt call? Just seems odd. Anyway, that's neither here nor there really. It was just one of those odd things. So I'm going to clean all of that up and make it a bit more bulky. Yeah. And then of course there's the question of documentation. I'll need to wrap documentation around it. And the question is, do I put that into the Gitea VM for development, or do I put it into or do I say, okay, the mistake I'm making here is I'm having a Gitea VM, and what I should have is a Salt Formula VM, and Gitea is just one case in point, and then put everything into the Gitea so all the documentation, everything would end up in the Gitea formula. Or do I say, no, the Gitea formula just has documentation for the use of the formula, and all the documentation about how things are set up and run stays outside. that to me seems a bit weird. You know, if you're going to go down that road, I think no, I think everything should be in the formula. Yeah, if you're going to go down that road, you might as well put everything in there, including all the documentation for how to use the formula and how to develop the formula in terms of things like running tests. And that means then that instead of having a Gitea VM, although, I mean, you know, the Gitea VM could just be the same as a Salt Formula VM, except it pulls out a particular Gitea project. I don't know. That one requires a little bit of thinking about. Not much. It's not that much of a headache. It's just a question of where do you want to put your time. Anyway, you tired, mate? Ah, poor Kenny. Yes. Right. That's it. Oh, the only other thing I did was I answered the question on Reddit. Actually, I answered a few, but this one in particular interested me enough that I made a little video about it, which is on the main Salty Vagrant Streams channel. It's just about the internals of Git add and commit and how it stores objects and sort of deltas of a project. Snapshots. Anyway, right, that's it.